Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls gathered around, welcome to week 5. This week we're going to talk about using quotations. And one of the most important things as an academic writer, one of the things you'll be asked to do is to take the words or ideas of other people and to insert them into your own ideas in ways that we have conversations, if you will, with different concepts that other people have presented. Right? It's kind of the way of doing our research or what have you. So this week we really want to talk about how we use those quotations in academic writing, what it means to use those quotations, and then just a couple of specific guidelines that you'll need to really move this into more of an academic type of environment. So hopefully you're ready to get started. I know we're ready to get started, so let's move on. So the first one, like I just said, a big part of academic writing involves working with the words and ideas of others. You'll be asked to do this quite a bit, so this is a really important concept to understand. Right? And some of the stuff we'll talk about this week are going to be maybe a little more advanced than what we're working on, but you'll run into that as you move along. So it's a good idea to kind of get a basic understanding of what we're doing. So why do we do this? Why do we do this? Well, we do this because this is how knowledge gets passed from one person to the next, and this is why it's so important to understand and work with the ideas of others, because as part and to understand that as part of the process we share our own thoughts, right? I think it's written better than I just explained it, so I'll just go back through and repeat that in the way that it's written. This is how knowledge gets passed from one person to the next, and why it is so important to understand and work with the ideas of others, and as part of the process to share our own thoughts. The goal of academic writing as you move forward, and maybe you don't feel like you're ready to do this yet, but you'll get there, the goal is to join the academic conversation. The goal is to become part of the creation, if you will, of knowledge, right? Your ideas matter, and while you may not have those ideas developed yet, as you experience things in your classes and as you learn more and more and more, you are going to become an expert in one idea or another, or maybe several ideas, and therefore your opinion at that point and your thoughts at that point are going to be extremely valuable, and that's why we write them down and we share them with other people, so other people can find those ideas sometime in the future and also be able to respond to your ideas and your thoughts. So while now at this point you're responding to the ideas of others, at some point someone will be responding to your ideas. So it's really important that we do this correctly and we give credit where credit is due and that type of thing. So the process of using words of others is called quoting, or using quotations. And this is what we'll be examining through this lecture. So there's specific things to keep in mind when quoting the words of somebody else. And let's go over some of those rules, right? Okay, so number one, always, 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 always respect the original author. When your ideas get out there and people are working with your ideas, you want to be represented for your ideas, not for someone twisting your ideas to make them fit into their what they're trying to say. So always respect the author. It's very likely that the author or authors you are quoting worked very hard to form their ideas before they share them with the world. Once again, you will work very hard on your ideas, so when you share them to the world, you're going to want to get that same respect. So most of them, as we say here, spent long hours researching their topic and drafting their essay to make sure it reflects what they understand and what they think about their topic. Because we know this, because we're going to be struggling with writing and struggling with these ideas, because we're aware of the difficulty that goes along with all of that writing and rewriting, all of that studying, we have to honor their words and the meaning behind them. Even, and actually I should probably say especially, if we don't agree with what the author has to say. We have to treat those ideas with respect. We have to be true to what the author's original intent was, at least to the extent that we know. I mean, sometimes we can't judge that intent, but we have to really try to do that. So that's rule number one. Always respect the original author. Let's move on. Actually, let's not move on. Part of that respect means that we don't change the author's wording, right? We must use it as it appears in the original text. Okay, so let's revisit that really quickly. In our little bold here, because it's really important. Quotations must be the exact words from the source, even if the author misspelled a word or left other problems on the page. So if you're reading someone else's work and they've misspelled something, you still print it as misspelled. There's ways to do that, and if you run across that in the future, ask your instructor or go and ask the Writing Center consultants what you do with that. It's something we don't really need to go into at this point, because most of the time, most of the people you'll encounter have had an editor look over their work or whatever, or they've really worked hard to make sure that their work is correct. But even so, even if they misspelled a word or left other problems on the page, we use the exact words of the author, right? So imagine, here we'll go through a little bit of a thing here. Imagine we're writing an essay about gun control, and we come across the following passage. Now, we may agree with this passage, we may not agree with this passage, but here's what the author said. The author said, guns are inanimate objects, so of course guns don't kill people on their own, but they do supply the owner of the gun the power to take a life with very little effort. That is fundamentally wrong for society. Now, this is written by, okay, so this is actually something that we made up just for this video. However, we're going to pretend, for the sake of this video, this was written by Mr. Buttonhook, right? And he wrote it in 2010, right? Of course, yeah, this isn't really a real person, so don't go seek them out, and if you don't agree with them, get in a battle with them, or don't use this quotation to prove your point or to disprove a point in some of your conversations. This is completely made up. But still, let's just say that they said, once again, guns are inanimate objects, so of course guns don't kill people on their own, but they do supply the owner of the gun the power to take a life with very little effort. That is fundamentally wrong for society. This is written by Buttonhook in 2010, right? So let's move on. So for the sake of the point we're making, let's say you're writing to persuade your readers that we need to protect gun ownership, right? You're saying that we need to reduce laws that prevent gun ownership, or we need to not make any more laws that prevent gun ownership. So you say, but you want to use the source, but you don't really like what the author has to say, right? You just think that I don't really like what he has to say, so I'm going to write. So in this case, you write, or we write the following, right? We write, Andre Buttonhook, right, an anti-gun activist, admits that guns are not the problem. In his essay, The Moral Side of the Gun Debate, right, Buttonhook writes that guns don't kill people. That guns don't kill people. Even those against gun ownership realize that guns are not dangerous. And I'm really sorry about the way this is formatted on the screen, but I think something kind of got messed up. But anyway, you're getting the basic idea, right? So in this, we've basically said that Andre Buttonhook, we've taken the words that he said, and he actually did say guns don't kill people, right? But did we give the author respect he deserves? Did we really follow the intentions of the author, right? Remember that the author was basically saying, and just to summarize his point, he was saying that it's true guns don't kill people, but it gives people a power to kill people, and that's wrong with society. So in here we're saying, oh, but even Buttonhook agrees that guns are not dangerous. Did he say that, right? Did we give him the respect that he deserves? Well, no, not really, and actually not at all. We didn't. We didn't respect the ideas behind the words he wrote, and we misrepresented what he said, right? We used the words he said, but we cherry-picked the piece out of the middle that didn't actually reflect what he said, right? We could use his words to our advantage, but we didn't give that author respect. So we've actually done something wrong. We've actually done something really bad here. What we could have said is, in his essay, The Moral Side of the Gun Debate, 2010, Andre Buttonhook, an anti-gun activist, claims that we have the power to take a life with very little effort. While that is a strong and well put together argument, Buttonhook doesn't take into account the fact that criminals hold the same power, and while guns can take a life, they can save a life just as easily. See how we took his words, we did not misrepresent what he said, but we turned it and we said, well, he said this, however, we say this. And now all of a sudden we have a really strong argument, right? So let's revisit this, how we did this as we move forward. Okay, so before we go on and really talk about that one concept, I want you to hold that in your head. We're going to keep working with this idea, and we're going to go on to our second rule. So our first one is we always respect the author, right? And then our second one, we're saying we refer to the authors by last name only. Now, we can use their first name in the beginning as we're explaining them, right? But as we talk about them later, we only want to use their last name. We never want to say, in this case, we never want to say, Andre says this, because we don't know Andre, and really we want to give this author respect. So as a way of giving them respect, we're going to treat them by using their last name only. Look at what we, so in here we say, notice how we use Buttonhook's first name in red when we, our first name, it's actually not in red. When we're using his last name, you know what? Ignore that whole part right there. Notice how we only use Buttonhook's first name in red when we also were using his last name. Yeah, I'm sorry, that makes sense. Okay, so notice how we used it only when we're also using his last name, but we don't use it later on in the construction. So let's go back through and look at the argument we're making, right? So in his essay, The Moral Side of Gun Debate, 2010, Andre Buttonhook, we've used his first name, right, but we also use his last name. So Andre Buttonhook, Pulitzer Prize-winning author and anti-gun activist, right? We're giving him a little more power in this, right? He claims that gun owners have the power to take life with very little effort. Buttonhook 2010, right? That's going to be our citation. We can get into that really later on. While that is a strong and well put together argument, Buttonhook, we use Buttonhook, we don't use Andre here, right? While that is a well put together argument, Buttonhook doesn't take into account the fact that criminals hold the same power, and while guns can take a life, guns can save a life just as easily. All right, notice how we're only using last name. We're still giving that respect. We're still giving it to him, to our author, right? As made up as our author is. All right, so let's go through and talk about our third rule. Introduce the text and qualify the author. That's kind of what we did a little bit in the last one, but let's really talk about how that works here. And we'll be talking about this at other parts in the class, other lectures in the class as well. So, but it sounds pretty simple, right? Introducing the text sounds pretty simple, but what do we mean by qualifying the author, right? We're going to talk about this more in another lecture, but let's talk about it here as well. Most of the time when we read something, we can find some sort of information about that author. The more your readers know your source is a quality source, the more likely they will accept your ideas, especially when that source holds a different point of view on your topic. Because what we're doing with this is the interesting thing. If you find someone who doesn't agree with you and you're able to take their ideas and say, yeah, this person feels this way, however, and then you come back with a strong argument, then they're saying, well, you're not just preaching to the choir, you've actually looked at the other side of the problem too, and you have a lot more clout when you're in your writing, right? So note in here, we introduced the text and identified the author supplying his credentials in blue, right? So we've said in his essay, The Moral Side of the Gun Debate, so we're basically in his essay, right, where that's kind of a signal phrase, if you will. We've talked about those. The Moral Side of the Gun Debate, right, that's going to be the text itself. Andre Buttonhook, the name of the author. Here's some cool things you should know about the author. He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning author. This is one of the greatest authors out there, right? So Pulitzer Prize-winning author, and he's also an anti-gun activist, right? So he's on the other side of the debate that we're arguing. And he claims that gun owners, and in his own words, they have the power to take a life with very little effort. Right? That's a strong argument. That's a strong argument. But then we turn it around, right? We don't dismiss it, but we say, well, wait a minute, hold on. That's true, right? And that's a strong and well put together argument, but Buttonhook doesn't take into account in his argument, he doesn't take into account the fact that criminals hold the same power, and while guns can take a life, guns can save a life just as easily. Right? So here, whether you agree with the argument we're making here, or whether you're on Buttonhook's side, whether you're on the work that we're doing here, regardless of which side you're doing, note how those things are working together, how we are using those words and using those concepts of our source, and we're turning them into our ideas, and we're saying that's important. However, there's also this, or and then of course if we agreed with Buttonhook, we could say Buttonhook claims that taking power to take life with very little effort. This is one of the reasons, as Buttonhook goes on to say, that this is a fundamental problem with society. Right? You could, if you're arguing the other thing, but we're not doing that. We're pretending that we are supporting the idea of gun ownership through our explanations. Okay, so moving on. Don't forget to use the signal phrase. We've talked a little bit about signal phrase, or a lot of people will call them attributive tags. We talked about that a little bit in one of the other lectures that we have. Maybe you've read that, or maybe you're getting to read that as we go along. But don't forget to use the signal phrase. So we talked about that a little bit earlier. But page 231 of our textbook lists some verbs you can use as signal phrases, right? The main thing to think about what verbs you decide to use is to think about what they mean and how it sounds with the rest of your essay. For instance, right, and we give this little thing, this little idea here. If we write, Buttonhook admits that gun owners, right, if we're going to say that, right, the meaning of what we're saying changes. So we're going to, because we're using Buttonhook admits. So if we said Buttonhook claims, right, it would be a little different, right? If we said, as we said in here, it's going to be a little different. So we're saying Buttonhook claims. If we say Buttonhook presents the idea, whatever, if you can replace it with those things. Think about those constructions as you use it. Think about what verbs you're using, how it sounds, what that verb really means, and what it really says that the author's saying. You're not going to necessarily have this down at first, but keep that in your mind as you're putting together. Don't make your writing too confusing. Don't confuse yourself, and don't worry too much about it. But just kind of keep that in your head as you're putting your arguments and your words together, right? And try not to use, as we say here, try not to use the exact signal phrase each time, right? It gets a bit boring, and you don't want to be boring. You don't want to simply say throughout the entire thing, Andre Buttonhook said, right? And then later on you said, you know, Philip Myers said. Shake it up a little bit, you know, change it just a little bit. Have some fun with those words. Just keep a list, if you will, and then just try not to repeat the same thing over and over and over again. I mean, technically it's still a signal phrase, and technically it's still doing a good job, but you want to keep your reader interested. You want to keep them challenged, and so on and so forth. So just kind of looking at what we're doing again, and I know I keep reading this thing over and over again, but we want to really look at it. So we have, in his essay, The Moral Side of the Gun Debate, Andre Buttonhook, Pulitzer Prize-winning author and anti-gun activist, claims being our signal phrase, right, claims that gun owners have the power to take life with very little effort, and so on and so forth, right? So we're seeing how that comes together. So don't forget to use your signal phrase, right? Here's the big one, and here's the one that people tend to forget. A lot of students tend to forget this. Remember, first and foremost, right, anything that you write, any argument you're making, any research paper that you're writing, first and foremost, this is your ideas, right? You are using your sources, you're using quotations, you're using these things to support your ideas. You're not going to let them take over what you write. So you have to, in this rule, comment on the quotation, right? Comment on it. You don't want to just let that quotation lay there. Let's say something about it. Let's make it make sense. And in our case, this is the most powerful part of this entire paragraph that we keep examining. So let me go ahead and just read the first part here, the introduction, right? Quotations should be used to support what we have to say, not to determine what we are saying, right? Keep that in mind, right? The research will inform what you have to say because you're going to learn a lot as you research, but don't let the quotations take over, right? So, therefore, because they're used to support what we have to say, not to determine what we are saying, we must demonstrate how the quotation fits into the rest of our claim, how it relates to our thesis, to our ideas, right? Sometimes we're tempted to miss this step because a quotation seems to cover our point completely. But writing is meant to be questioned, and it's our responsibility to start that line of questioning, right? Writing, note how we use the quotation and tie it back into our position in our topic, and this is the green part of what we're doing here, right? This is the green thing. We've talked about this quite a lot, but let's just really identify as the comment on the quotation part, right? So in the beginning, we say, in his essay, The Moral Side of Gun Debate in 2010, Andre Buttonhook, Pulitzer Prize-winning author and anti-gun activist, claims that gun owners have the power to take life with very little effort, right? That's what this guy said. Well, we come back and we say, while that's a strong and well put together argument, Mr. Buttonhook, right? Buttonhook doesn't take into account the fact that criminals hold the same power. They also have guns, right? So they hold the same power, and while guns can take a life, guns can save a life just as easily. Notice how that comes together, right? Without that part, without that green section in here, right, we're totally letting Buttonhook take over the conversation, and he's winning. but we don't want him to win. We don't want Buttonhook to win this because we don't want it, because this is a really powerful guy and he really knows what he's talking about and he makes a really good argument, right? But we don't want to let him take over what we're saying. We simply want to use what he's saying to show that we've examined the other side, that we understand the concerns of the people who may be against our ideas, but we're going to pull them over onto our side. We're still going to say, look, hey, we examined that. We think that's important to think about. However, we need to also think about this, and that's what helps prove what we're saying. Right? So we have to make those comments, because if we don't make those comments, we're letting their ideas gauge the entire argument, and we're losing. We don't want to lose. Well, I mean, technically, you want to use argument to find the best solution to the problem, but we also want to present our arguments as, hopefully winning arguments. Hopefully we want to really make our point heard. So essentially, within our own paper, we want to be winning, right? So we don't want to let someone else take over our essay, especially someone else who isn't in the room, right? So let's go through, right? Always using quotations, always use these steps. Always, 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 always never forget this. Never, ever forget this. Write this down, get a tattoo on your arm, whatever it takes. Always remember this, right? Using quotations always involve, number one, introducing the essay and qualifying the author. Always, always, always tell your readers, well, I mean, you're writing your readers, but show your readers why this author is important, right? Show these readers where they can find the information so they can access that as well, right? So we always want to say in the quotation, I say introduce the essay, yeah, or source. It could be any source, right? But introduce that source, right? That article, that essay, that book, that video, that movie, that whatever. Introduce that. And then qualify. Qualifying being that we're saying that Andre Buttonhook is not just some guy, right? He is a Pulitzer Prize winning author and anti-gun activist. So we see why his words are important, and we see kind of where his position is. So this is why he belongs in our essay, right? We've brought in the big guns, even if they're against us. We've brought in the big guns and we've taken on the big guns, right? Same thing, of course, if you're using someone to help support your ideas, right? The same concept. You bring in the big guns. You bring in people who have some sort of clout, and always just let your readers know who that clout, who that person is, and why they have clout, right? Always use a signal phrase. Always use claimed, said, presents the idea. Whatever the signal phrase you're going to use, always use that, right? Always make sure you're using that construction, right? Enter the quotation in to your thing, but be mindful not to change the words or meanings. You don't have to use the whole quotation. You don't have to use the whole sentence. Note in what we did, we had that whole paragraph. We took pieces of that paragraph, but we took pieces of that paragraph that still supported what the author was originally saying, right? But we took a piece of that out and we examined that piece. So, but make sure that piece that you pull out is representative of what the author was saying, and make sure that it's word for word, right? So always do that. Number 4, always, 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 always never forget, comment on the quotation, and always use that to tie directly back into your thesis, right? So Buttonhook said this, however, this is this, we feel this. We feel like that Buttonhook didn't think about this, or didn't address this situation, or whatever, and that is why we should not limit guns, like for our example, right? Okay, so let's move on. So most importantly, and we've already said this before, we've said it several times, remember that this is your essay, not an extension of the author's text you're working with. We're not giving Buttonhook an additional voice, right? We are using our voice. So we should do, as writers, do the majority of the talking. No more than 20% of your essay should be in quotations, right? So we should do the majority of the talking. We can't let our sources overtake our essay. We have to maintain the control of information. Of course, there's more that you're going to learn about quotations. You're going to cover those in EN101 and EN102. For now, though, just follow these steps, and we'll build on this later. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, as always, let us know. We'd be more than happy to help you. All right, have a great day. Bye.